What we have found, and we called it the AI paradox in our growth index, is that AI adoption by itself absolutely does not predict financial performance.
Hi, I'm Chris Sugden, managing partner at Edison Partners and your host of Electrifying Growth. This is Sit Down with Sugden, where I share from my experiences as both the investor and an operator to help you get that next stage of growth.
Hey everyone, on this edition of Sit Down with Sugden, I want to explore a little bit of, we're all living this, AI sort of tumult, opportunity and enthusiasm meets, oh my God, challenges and the world's coming to an end and the end of all jobs for humans. All those things are kind of converging. Edison publishes our growth index annually, and we just published ours last month. You can go to our website and get it. But we explored the concept of healthy urgency in the age of AI. And is that an oxymoron? Can they coexist? And frankly, what does it take to have healthy urgency in the age of AI? In a separate podcast, I'm actually talking to my partner who helped sort of manage the study and promote and actually, gather the data about the growth index and what it told us about our portfolio companies. So a little plug and shout out to that episode with Ben Laufer, and we'll discuss in depth the growth index. But let's just talk about it for a second. Healthy urgency. We've talked about it before and defined it before in different episodes, but it's a term we sort of coined to not have it sound like the overwhelming, overbearing, everything's got to be urgent, because all of us type A's out there can feel like if you just use that word. So can you be healthy in that approach? What we noticed in the growth index, there are three really important factors: AI or not, the age of AI or not. And those may seem obvious. We'll get into how they actually impact performance in the growth index discussion with Ben, but let's talk about for a second alignment, efficiency, and sustainability. Because the one thing that I'll sort of highlight here is, and again, we'll get into it in more detail, AI will accelerate the state you're already in. So if you're misaligned, you're going to be misaligned even worse or faster. If you are inefficient, AI will actually increase your inefficiency, which again, how's that possible? And if you have an organization that has a pace that isn't sustainable, where burnout is likely to happen, AI will actually drive you there faster. So repeat those three things: alignment, efficiency, and sustainability. And Ben and I, in a separate discussion, will give you a little bit more around data and what we found in the numbers with our portfolio companies. But let's just talk about alignment and what that means for a minute. ELT, executive leadership team, SLT, senior leadership team for a big company, sometimes mid-sized to small companies, that's all one. All the way down, does everyone understand the priorities? That's alignment. But what gets missed a lot of times, if you do have a board or your venture or PE backed, growth equity backed, is your board actually on the same page of those priorities? So a lot of times that's a missing piece. So you have these board meetings where there ends up being whiplash because your board isn't aware of the priorities you are as an executive team. So alignment, meaning from board all the way down, but absolutely from board to ELT and ELT to your team, is something that the numbers prove out. Alignment in the age of AI is an absolute must. It's not an option. Your adoption of AI and the things you're expecting to get out of it, the return you're expecting of the things, will absolutely not happen if you're not aligned. The other thing that we see, kind of combining healthy urgency and alignment for a second and staying away from the other topics around the growth index, are this idea that who owns this AI adoption from an urgency and being healthy perspective. It shouldn't be a CEO only thing. At the same time, I will steal this from somebody else. Won't necessarily source it because it could be many people, but the chief executive officer needs to be the chief AI officer. This isn't a technology only thing, this AI thing. And that actually speaks to healthy urgency as well, because if it's not being led by the CEO, it's going to end up being in pockets and all over the place. That said, what we have found is the CEO leads the AI initiatives, but the ELT members need to own their own parts of it as well. So the CEO or the CTO can't be diving into other people's organizations, because that will create misalignment really fast. So CAIO, Chief AI Officer, is the CEO, but that CEO, just like a good CEO, would delegate anything in the business to people who should be living and breathing it. That still applies. That idea of delegation to your ELT members. It doesn't change because now you're in the age of AI. So folks, if you've been hanging here on the video, you're not just listening. If you see this sort of color change, our office just had a little power surge of some kind. So hopefully you're bearing with me and you're not like, what the heck are they doing there? Let me just make sure I connect the dots between alignment, efficiency, and sustainability. Alignment does trump all is what our findings say with our growth index and our portfolio companies. And like I said, without going way in the weeds of how we develop this, it's thousands of data points and hundreds of survey respondents. So this is statistically, as they say, valid kind of information. But I'm going to stay away from that data level of sort of measuring. We'll do that with the other episode there with me and Ben. But for this purpose, what happens is alignment or lack thereof will create more inefficiencies. And then what will happen there upon that will become what'll feel like unhealthy urgency because it'll create burnout because we're chasing and putting out fires. So sort of why alignment trumps all and how it connects to efficiency and sustainability. If you get misaligned, your efficiency will break down and you'll end up with a burnout kind of culture. That's what the data has told us. So that's why we sort of say alignment, quote unquote, trumps all. But we also found this to be the case because the ELT, without the board being aligned, the ELT ends up managing sort of two masters, if you will, a board and their team. And so that's why we're finding is we have found in our portfolio companies, our boards weren't as aligned. And we take that as an Edison kind of challenge because we're typically the lead board member. We weren't doing a good enough job making sure our boards and our ELT were aligned first and then let the ELT kind of cascade down. And remember, when I say our boards, Edison's strategy is roughly 50-50 control, non-control, or minority, majority investing. So we're not sitting here with a buyout firm mentality. We actually are sitting here with a partnering with the CEO and your management team mentality. So when I say our boards, it's really the CEO's board. It's the CEO's responsibility to make sure alignment happens up and down. It's the old managing up kind of mantra. So the CEO, again, back to AI, the age of AI, the chief AI officer, ensuring that alignment is happening, not just down in the organization, but up with the board is a really big, important task to have. And we found that not happening. It was almost as bad as when the alignment wasn't with your team as well. Because some ELTs would say, but if my team has got it, why does the board matter? Because then the CEO and your executive team are chasing board goals and trying to please them. And the rest of your team has a different set of goals or priorities. And that creates sort of a little bit of, we'll call it really whiplash. You're chasing two different masters. So I'm hoping this, this sit down with Sugden will not meant to be strictly growth index because we got a separate podcast for that. Go to our growth index and see it. But we're all living in this crazy state, if you will, this hairy state of AI. If I'm not doing something, this podcast, this editorial, this white paper is all telling me I need to go adopt and think, AI can do everything for me. True that the technology is amazing and probably being understated. That part I can agree with. Not true is just going off and telling your team to go figure it out, go adopt AI. That creates bigger problems in the organization is what we have found because you'll have uneven adoption, but more importantly, you'll end up with some parts of the organization showboating, some parts of the organization being left behind, and you're back to this misalignment, then creates inefficiency, then it creates burnout. So it's sort of a vicious cycle or circle versus a virtuous one if you don't start with alignment. Let me make sure I kind of bring it all together relative to this age of AI, this feeling like, and I say that for you management team members, you founders, your CEOs out there that are listening, you feel like you got to do something. Like it feels like the world is leaving you behind for not doing something with AI. What we have found, and we called it the AI paradox in our growth index, is that AI adoption by itself absolutely does not predict financial performance. Some of you may be familiar with, I believe it was a McKinsey study just a few months ago, 95, 96% of AI initiatives weren't creating ROI for big companies. The same is true for mid-size, high growth companies that we invest in. What we found out was AI in of itself only exacerbates the current state you're in. So if you're not performing really well and or you're having a hard time achieving your financial goals, it's actually going to make those issues kind of even more acute as opposed to fixing anything. So I think that's the message that the growth index left for me, this paradox of AI is not a magic bullet. AI is a tool, and we'll talk a little bit about it in this other episode I was referring to earlier, but AI is a tool to be more efficient, but is not the unlock to have efficiency and to have sustainability in your organization. Those things come first. So the paradox of AI, I'll use my own spin on it. My colleague Ben has a different spin, but this idea that people don't matter, the robots, the machines will take over our jobs, that, lots of displacement. I won't get into that, whether they'll be truck drivers or people working in warehouses anymore, and robots will all do that. But here's what is interesting in companies that we invest in. Without alignment, without a strong culture, AI will hasten your demise or your chance of missing your numbers. So this paradox would be the things that people in the past would have considered the touchy-feely culture things. It's important you get those right before you really embark on a fully AI sort of minded business, because all of the problems that kind of lurk in the corners in an AI organization, a heavily, sort of adopted AI organization, those things will come shining through. The misalignment, where creativity sits in pockets and not in others, all those things come out in post-AI adoption. So no magic bullet or magic elixir relative to getting culture and team right. You got to get those right before you adopt AI. And sure, you're telling me you're perfect now with team. Have you measured it? Have you measured alignment? Have you asked literally in a blind survey, hey board, what's my top 3 priorities? What is the company's priorities? And then when you measure it against what the top 3 are they directionally right? That's a simple alignment test. And that's what we did in developing our growth index. So I think what I'll call the AI paradox, and we'll get into it a little bit more in the growth index episode, is this idea that AI will make people less needed rather than, a worse word, extinct. It actually becomes even more needed in terms of people elements for connectivity. So again, think about healthy urgency in these 3 buckets, and please go to our growth index and download it. You'll get more sort of actionable data and some takeaways. We measured some really important things, and we share with you what are the most important measurables around financial measurables around both healthy urgency and AI adoption. But getting alignment right first is a bit of a paradox, is a bit of a different thing, because some would say if humans are going to be extinct or jobs will be replaced by AI, then how is alignment even needed? You won't end up keeping the people that you actually have in your organization that are great people, because they'll end up, back to the sustainability point, they'll end up being burned out. What the data tells us from our portfolio companies, again, in the growth index, a lot more detail, is just being aligned won't actually get you there either. And if I've spent some time on this episode talking too much about alignment and leaving you with that feeling, if I just get alignment right, everything else will fall, what ends up happening is you can be aligned, but you're not efficient enough. That may sound, again, like an oxymoron if you're a high growth company, you're adopting AI. But the point is you need all 3 working together, any one alone. So a really great, healthy culture around, strong culture around sustainability, wellness, and people, feel like the culture is the best. That alone won't actually make up for a misaligned organization and or an inefficient organization. So one of the things that really came through the data, and again, it's all out there for you to sort of peruse, is these 3 elements have to come together and be working together to really unlock the value, not only of AI, but to unlock your organizational value. So our top performers, financial performers, had all 3. Now, every one didn't work at the same level, but the correlation to financial performance was all 3 working together. The financial performance did not correlate to 1 or 2 really trumping the other 1 or 2, if that makes sense. To bring this all together, I think this concept of healthy urgency can actually sound, no offense to HR people, can sound a bit touchy-feely and sound a bit like kumbaya. I'll literally read this, and I don't do that a lot, but this is how Edison has defined healthy urgency. And to me, it's actually somewhat profound, but healthy urgency is the organizational condition where leaders execute against shared priorities, underlined shared, with enough intensity to drive results. Now, between drive and results, I'll add financial results, with enough discipline to sustain that pace. So if there isn't the discipline, that high pace turns into burnout, which turns into turnover, which then sort of has that really back to that vicious cycle instead of virtuous cycle of having to retrain, recruit, retrain, et cetera, and get all the people back on the bus again. Thank you for joining this episode of Electrifying Growth. For more resources, inspiration, and a look inside the Edison Partners network, sign up for our newsletter at www.edisonpartners.com. Click on the Stay in the Know button in the top right corner of our webpage. Thank you again.